Out of a whopping 3,600 acres, just under 300 are currently tillable. In other words, there were far less than the standard 10% of the farm and food dedicated specifically for the deer throughout the year.
At closing, there were crews already cutting timber and clearing an area that was reclaimed by the state to convert back into pasture ground. This new pasture ground would supply the deer with a food source that could not be eaten out, at the same time satisfying the state's wishes of erosion prevention.
Problem number one is the buck-to-doe ratio. Having said that, as the loggers and bulldozers continued clearing new fields, Mark placed 3 blinds on the southern end of the property, one in each existing large field. Then, once the future food plots were located and identified, a 3rd blind was placed in the brand new killing plot, designed to be surrounded by timber.
When Mark called and explained what was going on, I jumped at the opportunity. I mean, it's not often you get the chance to work on a property that's over 3,000 acres. First thing we did, we took a look at some maps just to get a feel for some of the layout. How much timber do we have? What percentage of it is in open fields or food plot opportunities? And one of the first things we noticed is heavily forested. In many cases, this can be a bad thing, particularly if the forests have not been managed in a number of years and you end up with a bunch of them in the same age class, and particularly older timber in the same age class, which then means there's not a lot of food or cover right at ground level. But fortunately, that was not the case on this ground.
With all the work going on throughout the farm, I felt like the deer were off the normal patterns and they seemed to be a little on edge. This made it tough to be efficient killers, and in the end, we had barely made a dent.
When Phil and I got into camp, we were both taken back at the damage the deer had done throughout the summer. Every beam in both fields were totally demolished. Phil was the first to connect from a tree stand located on the north end of the property. The strategy here was to catch the does that were funneling out of the corner of this 50-acre field. Plus, this kept his gunshots from spooking any of the deer I was hunting on the south side of the farm. So I was sitting in a lone wolf ladder in the corner of an existing 75-acre field. This was a natural funnel area where the deer would come out, feed a little bit, and then migrate through the field. Or they could cross the creek over to the huge 221-acre field that was also in beam. Our thought was to keep the pressure away from the larger field, since that's where the majority of the deer were ending up. This would also reserve the larger fields as a low-pressure area throughout the season.
When the rut finally came into full swing, I had only a few days to hunt. Wouldn't you know it, it rained for 2 solid days. I sat in a blind located on the edge of a small secluded bean field. My thoughts were that the deer should use this field during all times of the day.
You know, Mark ended up taking his doe from the same field that I shot mine. The only difference was he had moved to a blind across the creek, because that was the portion of the field that the winter wheat had already germinated. You know, the large field remained fairly untouched throughout the season, and there's really 2 reasons why. First and foremost, pressure is key. Safety is first in every deer's mind. Secondly, the large field was the last to be overseeded, which was the shortest amount of forage, except in the corner where Mark tagged his doe. That's why the blind was placed in that corner.
As soon as we got on the ground on the farm, one of the first things we wanted to take a look at is just let's see what we have within those forested areas. We had lots of food, lots of cover there to hide those fawns and to allow those adult deer to get in there and feel real secure. One of the things that I like to take a look at are those early successional habitats, or those species that are real high quality deer food. Things like greenbrier, blackberries, a bunch of the forbs, and on the trails in here, those were abundant. And looking at some of that, we could see that some of them were browsed by deer, but more importantly, the vast majority of those over there were not browsed, which means that essentially we're providing plenty of food for the existing deer herd. The third thing is we take a look at, use those food plots as a bonus to the deer, but also then to make sure we can put them in very killable situations, but then strategically lay in where we can have a food source very close to a very thick bedding area, close to some of the tillable areas, so that deer want to be there, which is key, but then also to be able for us to put them in a very predictable situation come this fall.